Good evening. Welcome. This is Novara Live. I'm Aaron Bastani. I'll be joined later by David Wearing, Kieran, Andrieu, as well as academic and author Kojo, Koram. Coming up on tonight's show, a very, very packed episode of Novara Live. An aid ship bound for Gaza has been firebombed while docked in Tunisia. Reform UK have vowed to scrap Labour's plans for Northern Rail if they're elected. And new details have sensationally emerged about Peter Mandelson's cosy relationship with the late Jeffrey Epstein. If you'd like to support our work here at Novara Media, you know what to do. You can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. I say it every week, but it never gets less important. Help us build a new media for different politics. And make sure to let us know your comments in the YouTube chat or tweet at us using the hashtag Novara Live. I really want to know your thoughts tonight. A wide range of stories. I've got to be real with you. Tuesdays tend to be the most boring day of the week. Thanks for tuning in anyway. I hope you're never bored when I'm hosting. Today has been panic stations, busy, 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 busy. We could have done a 2-hour show, quite frankly. So a lot to get through. And I really think these are important stories. And some of them aren't going to be told in this kind of way anywhere else. So thank you for joining us tonight. First story. The Israeli military has attacked Qatar's capital, Doha. We've geolocated this footage, which shows the moment Israeli missiles hit the city.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Sana hindi pumani yung kotse. Oh my God!
Israel immediately admitted responsibility for the attack, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu posting this shortly afterwards. Prime Minister's office: today's action against the top terrorist chieftains of Hamas was a wholly independent Israeli operation. Israel initiated it, Israel conducted it, and Israel takes full responsibility. Meanwhile, the Israeli military gave this justification for the assault on the capital of a sovereign state. The IDF and ISA conducted a precise strike targeting the senior leadership of the Hamas terrorist organization. For years, these members of the Hamas leadership have led the terrorist organization's operations, are directly responsible for the brutal October 7th massacre, and have been orchestrating and managing the war against the state of Israel. Prior to the strike, measures were taken in order to mitigate harm to civilians, including the use of precise munitions and additional intelligence. The IDF and ISA will continue to operate with determination in order to defeat the Hamas terrorist organization responsible for the October 7th massacre. As Israel says there, the target was Hamas's leadership. It's understood that 5 senior Hamas figures were meeting in this building in Gaza to discuss the latest ceasefire proposal over Gaza. One of them, Khalil al-Hayya, who previously served as the deputy leader of the Hamas political wing, is reported to have been killed in that strike. In a statement, Netanyahu's office gave a little more detail about why the attack had been carried out now, saying this. Yesterday, after the murderous attacks in Jerusalem and Gaza, Prime Minister Netanyahu directed all security elements to prepare for the possibility of striking the Hamas leadership. The defense minister fully supported this initiative. This afternoon, in light of an operational opportunity and in consultation with all security establishment heads and with full backing, the Prime Minister and the defense minister decided to implement the directive that was given last night to the IDF and the ISA, which did so with precision and in an optimal manner. That is, of course, a reference to an attack on a bus stop in Jerusalem yesterday. 6 people were killed and 12 injured when Palestinian gunmen opened fire on the bus stop, with people abandoning their cars to flee the bullets. The gunmen were shot dead at the scene by an off-duty soldier and a civilian. Also on Monday, Hamas attacked an Israeli military camp in Gaza City, killing 4 soldiers. The attacks followed a series of Israeli military strikes on high-rise residential buildings in Gaza City, displacing hundreds of families that were sheltering in them, as well as leaving them without adequate shelter or basic necessities, and that's according to the United Nations. Israel's decision to attack a sovereign state as well as a close American ally is extraordinary. Qatar has, of course, condemned the attack, with the country's foreign ministry saying this. The state of Gaza strongly condemns the cowardly Israeli attack that targeted residential buildings housing several members of the political bureau of Hamas in the Qatari capital, Doha. This criminal assault constitutes a blatant violation of all international laws and norms and poses a serious threat to the security and safety of Qataris and residents in Gaza. While the state of Gaza strongly condemns this assault, it confirms that it will not tolerate this reckless Israeli behavior and the ongoing disruption of regional security, nor any act that targets its security and sovereignty. I'm joined now by David Wearing, lecturer in international relations at the University of Sussex. David, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
We have talked a lot about Israeli policy, Israeli war efforts in the last 2 years. Where does this attack today stand relative to what it's done in Lebanon, Gaza, and so on? Iran as well. Is this an escalation of sorts, or is it a continuation of what we've seen over the last 24 months?
It's qualitatively different, and the reason is that it struck a US ally. I mean, it's one thing to hit Gaza, where Hamas preside. It's one thing to hit Lebanon, where Hezbollah preside. It's one thing to hit Iran, where the regime there presides. But it's something else entirely to hit Qatar, which is a US ally, which has had reasonably warm relations with Israel up till now, which is. It's really hard to take in and process, even over the last couple of hours since I've heard this, just what a huge escalation this is. It's really shocking. Think about the status of Qatar within the regional architecture laid down by US imperialism, right? I mean, for a start, the Persian Gulf is the heart of everything. That's the energy heartlands of the planet. That's the whole reason the US is in the region to begin with. In the Persian Gulf, where Qatar is located, Qatar being the site of an enormous gas field, huge provider of gas to world markets. In Qatar itself, you've got this massive US airbase, which is a major, major node of US imperialism, US militarism in the region. Right? So for the US to project military power into the Gulf, into the Middle East more broadly, that airbase in Qatar is at the absolute centre of that. And Qatar itself is designated as a major non-NATO ally for the US. So for Israel to strike not just any old US ally, but so important a US ally, and apparently with de facto permission from the US, because what we hear from the BBC is that the Israelis notified, quote unquote, the White House. I mean, that's gaining permission, effectively. They'll never put it like that. But if Israel tells the US, oh, we're thinking of bombing Qatar, and the US says, are you out of your minds? The Israelis will say, okay, sorry, we won't do it, because that's the power relation between the two, right? So if the Americans nod their heads and say, okay, we get you, when the Israelis say we're going to hit Qatar, that is permission. So Qatar, from their point of view, thinking they were a US ally, a close US ally, has just found themselves bombed by another US ally with the permission de facto of the US. So, as I say, a lot of really extreme stuff has happened in the past couple of years, and this is right up there with all of it. It's a major escalation and something, quite different to what we've seen up till now.
Is there a chance that Qatar cooperated with Israel over this attack? Now, I don't personally believe that, but of course, we have the recent example of effectively Qatar saying that Iran can have an off-ramp with regards to the conflict with Israel, and it can hit a US base and nobody died, and it was just seemingly symbolic. Given that precedent with Qatar specifically, do you think it's plausible that they cooperated with Israel, or is that just simply unthinkable? Because for me, I mean, as somebody who's just watching this and hasn't got the foreign policy expertise of yourself, particularly in this region, I would just say, why wouldn't you just do targeted assassinations rather than blow up multiple buildings? But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is possible.
I've seen this floating around on the internet. I just think the idea is, states don't invite airstrikes on their own territory, let alone on their own capital, and let alone in an area of their capital where, the foreign elite live and work, I mean, Qatar's whole geostrategy, if you like, apart from, being a US military ally and being a gas provider to world markets, a big part of its geostrategy is being a kind of sort of node of international diplomacy, a centre for international diplomacy, where people can come and have talks about their various conflicts, and where there's also a kind of ecosystem of think tanks and universities. I mean, I've got friends in Qatar who I'm waiting to hear back from to see if they're okay. One's a journalist, one's an academic. The idea that the Qataris would endanger all of that by telling all of these people who they've invited to and have come to Doha to work as, to work as academics, to work as journalists, to work in think tanks, that they'd send this message to all those people who've come to Qatar for diplomacy. The message being, you're not safe here anymore. We can't guarantee your safety even as a US ally. It's just, I don't know, we're always going to hear conspiracy theories on the internet, but I mean, really, forget this one.
I mean, I'm inclined to agree. Gaza is wholly dependent on importing capital, labor. It has obviously lots of capital via petroleum, but it's made a big thing of its model being high net worth individuals going to Qatar to keep its residential construction property boom going and so on. I also have a good friend there. I'm sure many people know people over there. I think there's something like 60,000 Brits are working in Doha permanently. So big British community over there. It seems very strange that you'd allow that to all be jeopardized for the sake of Israel going after Hamas. And seemingly, we don't quite know the full picture, but they haven't taken out all the people they were trying to take out. David, my final question for you this evening: where do you think this goes next? Because, of course, Gaza has its own air force. I mean, that would be my first question. Would there be a retaliation of sorts? I presume not, but they do have an air force. They do have a military. And then secondly, what kinds of questions does this raise for other countries in the US orbit in that part of the world? Will they increasingly be thinking about collective defense arrangements? I'm thinking Saudi, the UAE, of course, Qatar, Kuwait, and so on. Could there be some sort of Arabian Peninsula collective security arrangement? Will they drift away from the US? And what have the relationships been like between countries like Qatar and Russia, China, etc.?
Yeah, okay. Well, first of those questions, I find it incredibly unlikely that Qatar would go to war with Israel. I mean, it was unthinkable, really. I mean, you have to remember that for all the huge amount of arms that the US has sold to the Gulf states, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990, they all went running to the US and said, please, can you protect us? No matter how many arms they bought from the US, they didn't feel militarily capable of defending themselves in that moment. Very much that. Well, I mean, there isn't going to be a Qatari airstrike on Israel. There isn't a chance of that. In terms of regional security arrangements, I mean, they've already got them to some extent in that there's this Gulf Cooperation Council, which is a kind of military security / political economic grouping of the 6 major Gulf monarchies, Saudis, Emiratis, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman. But again, this isn't a substitute for their major security provider, which is supposed to be the US, which is why this event is so shocking. Now, going forward, what's the response? It's not going to be military, but in the longer term, what's the response? I mean, think about these Abraham Accords, which some of your viewers may know about, which was an initiative pursued by Donald Trump, but then also by Joe Biden in his first term, but then also by Joe Biden after that, to try and get the Israelis to enter into cordial, full diplomatic relations with their Arab neighbours. And that started off 5 years ago. The Israelis signed deals with the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco. There was this push to get the rest of the Arab states to sign up to these deals, get the Saudis to sign up to one, and really integrate the Israelis fully into the regional system. I mean, that's completely off the table at this point. It would be unthinkable. Even put aside the genocide, I mean, if the Israelis are even attacking Gulf states, it's just unthinkable that the Gulf states, any of them, Qatar, Saudi, any of them, would enter into these kind of agreements. And so that dimension of US diplomacy in the region, which Biden's people really wanted to make part of a Gaza ceasefire plus that kind of thaw between the Israelis and the Arab states. That's gone. That's gone, and diplomacy over Gaza has gone as well. Any sense that there is some potential ceasefire that could be negotiated, the Israelis have extremely literally blown that up. They've said from the beginning they want total victory. The British, the French, the Germans, and the Americans, and Joe Biden kept saying, "Oh, well, we're going to try and broker a ceasefire." That whole fig leaf has gone. They don't want a ceasefire. There's not going to be a ceasefire. There's not going to be negotiations. Israel is just going to push on to victory now. And they obviously don't care about the hostages and all of that. And so, that's the picture going forward. But, it's still all up in the air. It's only just happened. So we're going to have to see how it unfolds.
David, thanks for joining us this evening. Really, really useful insights. That was the moment an incendiary device struck one of the ships in the Sumud Flotilla bound for Gaza. The explosion you saw there occurred around 11:30 p.m. local time last night, striking the family ship. That's the boat carrying Greta Thunberg, as well as our own Kieran and Andrieu, though neither were on board during what appears to be a deliberate attack. Now, we've come to that conclusion by forensically examining the footage of the attack, and our conclusion directly contradicts the Tunisian authorities, with Interior Ministry over there saying that claims of a drone strike, quote, have no basis in truth. That is the sovereign government of the country where this happened. The Coast Guard has also claimed the fire may have been caused by a cigarette being thrown into a pile of life jackets. We can say here at Novara Media with utter confidence that was not the case. This footage shot from a nearby boat shows the moment a flaming object hits the boat in question, causing an explosion. Seen from this angle, shot from aboard the family boat, the explosion is more moderate, giving rise to a fire. So you can see that the officials in Tunisia aren't quite right. If we slow down and brighten the original footage, you can clearly see three important things. First, the incendiary object drops directly down from a height above the boat. Second, it ignites mid-air. And third, you can see what appears to be accelerant already ablaze flowing away from the object in its wake. Our theory here at Novara Media is that the incendiary object was dropped from a drone and that it was ignited remotely mid-air while carrying its own accelerant supply. On impact, that accelerant spread, causing the blaze. Essentially, a sophisticated Molotov cocktail rigged with an ignition switch. And if we focus in on the first few moments of the footage, you can clearly see that when it ignites, a smaller object is thrown away from the main object. That appears to be something like an ignition switch. The damage on board the ship also appears consistent with an accelerant-fueled fire rather than with a more traditional drone strike using a missile or other projectile. This is the aftermath of the explosion. As you can see, there is charring and burn marks on the deck and hull, but no breach of the material. There is also smoke damage to the exteriors of cabins. That might have been a stroke of luck, with the incendiary device appearing to have landed in or near a pile of the ship's life jackets. Those are flame-resistant objects, remember, that may have helped to stop the fire spreading further. If the aim of the attack was to prevent the ship from sailing any further or to injure its passengers and crew, it failed. Novara Media understands there has been no structural damage to the ship. If the aim, however, was to have some kind of effect on morale, it may have succeeded, with some passengers clearly panicked by the explosion. Yusuf Omar, who was aboard the ship at the time, live-streamed his reaction.
Our vessel is on fire. We have been hit by what appears to be a drone. We are on the flotilla off the coast of Tunis. We just got hit. The vessel is on fire. Our vessel is on fire. We've been hit by what appears to be a drone. We've been hit by what appears to be a drone. We are on the flotilla vessel off the coast of Tunis. We are on the flotilla vessel off the coast of Tunis. We've been hit. Are we abandoning ship? I don't know. Putting this on. It was a massive explosion. A massive, massive explosion. Just meters away.
Early reports from the boat also suggested that the object nearly struck a fuel tank, but Novara Media understands that is not the case. Earlier today, Novara Media's Charlotte England spoke to family passenger Miguel Duarte in Tunis, where she asked him to give his account of the explosion.
My name is Miguel Duarte. I'm a Portuguese citizen. I'm a civil sea rescuer in the Mediterranean Sea, and I'm a scholar in the university in Lisbon. Last night, I was doing a night shift on one of the ships that compose the global Sumud Flotilla that is on its way to Gaza right now. Close to midnight, I was standing on the aft deck, so the back part of the ship, and I heard a noise that was clearly a drone approaching the ship. I couldn't see it because there was a cover on the deck, so I got out of that cover, looked up, and saw, sure enough, a drone that was hovering about 3 or 4 meters above my head. Called someone, that someone came as well, saw the drone. We stood there under the drone for a few seconds, and then the drone moved slowly until it was hovering just over the forward deck. Stood there for a few seconds and then dropped what was obviously a bomb of some kind that triggered a big fire. There were flames everywhere in the forward deck, even like going beyond the railing of the ship. So a big explosion with a big flash. Obviously that triggered a fire, and we got the fire extinguishers from everywhere in the ship and fought the fire. Fortunately, within a few minutes, we were able to control it and to put it out, with superficial damage to the ship, and fortunately no serious injuries on the crew. So we were 6 people in the crew at that point, which is also good because we're usually above 20 on that ship. Fortunately, everybody was safe.
What did the drone look like? Like, was it big for a drone?
I'm no specialist in drones, so I don't know how. I don't know what's a normal sized drone, but it was a drone like about this size, square, probably with some helices. I don't know if that's a word in English. Making a lot of noise in the air, and certainly carrying something that it then dropped on our deck. Pretty difficult to see as well because it was very dark and it had no lights. But it came so close to us that we could very, very clearly see that it's one of those drones that are like an X-shaped, carrying this something that we realized that was a bomb.
And presumably, there's no way to see where it came from.
Absolutely no way. I mean, I realized it was approaching when it was already almost over above the aft deck, and when it dropped the bomb, the explosion was so quick to take over a big portion of the ship that I obviously never even looked at the drone again. So I think it went, in the direction of the bow of the ship, but I can't be certain. So we have no idea where it came from or where it's going, but there are very little doubts about who sent it.
And why was the fire so big? Like, was there flammable stuff that it hit, or was it just a lot of fire that came out of the sky?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of fire coming out of the sky for sure. The explosive was the flames that were triggered by the explosive were big. However, it landed on a pile of life jackets, and those life jackets are made of plastic and styrofoam, and also that is quite flammable. So all of this smoke coming out of burnt plastic kind of took over the ship, and I think that increased the danger of the fumes and also the flames. So at some point, a big part of the ship was not accessible because of that.
And what happened in the kind of 1 or 2 hours afterwards?
Then almost immediately after we put out the fire, we had the police and the Coast Guard. The police and the Coast Guard coming over and taking. They inspected the ship, inspected the burning, the site of the burning. Eventually, the organizers of the Global Sumud Flotilla also joined us, and we decided to replace the crew that was there. The crew that fought the fire went to land, and it was replaced by some people who went there to take over the shifts.
How much did the Coast Guard investigate and ask questions?
That is not, I can't really say because, they asked us what had happened. We answered to the best of our knowledge. They inspected the floor, but then we left and the Coast Guard and the police were still there. The authorities were still there and they were about to start to conduct their more detailed search or investigation there. So I don't know the results yet.
But they've come back and said that they think a cigarette started it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, there's absolutely zero doubt in my mind that what triggered this explosion was a drone carrying some sort of explosive that was dropped on the forward part of the deck. I'm 100% sure of this. Maybe we would be in a difficult situation if it would be only my word, but there's video evidence, right? One of the ships had a camera pointed to the ship where I was. And although it was night, you can clearly see a bomb being dropped out of somewhere in the sky and hitting the deck.
And as far as you're aware, will families still be sailing and will you still be on board?
Yeah, most likely. I can't say for sure yet. We have to inspect the ship, but as far as I could see, the damage was only superficial. And so the plan is to stick with the mission. We didn't start sailing because we thought it was safe. We did it because it was needed. And if this changes anything, it only shows us that it's more needed than we thought.
That was Sumud Flotilla passenger Miguel Duarte. I should say he refers repeatedly to the family boat, the family ship. And there have been a few questions in the chat. Is that a boat that had families on it? No, that's the name of the vessel which was hit, which Kieran Andrieu is on, which Greta Thunberg is on. And that's the question that was posed there. Will the family boat, the family vessel be able to continue? Quite extraordinary, isn't it? The Tunisian Coast Guard saying it was a cigarette. I don't think they're just making that up on the fly. I'm sure you'd have these kinds of conversations between different parts of the Tunisian state apparatus. Okay, when this ship docks in Tunisia, if something happens, what do we do? There was the recent experience in Malta, right? What do we do? And I suspect the modus operandi is lie, bullshit. Let's just get them out of our waters as quickly as possible, please. We do not want a diplomatic incident involving the Israelis because, as we saw with our first story, you don't want to get on the wrong side of what is effectively a gangster state, which has the blessing of the world's only military superpower, the United States. Quite clearly, this was not started by cigarettes. But while the immediate danger may have been low, fear is not unwarranted. In May this year, the Conscience, a ship traveling to Gaza organized by the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, was, as I mentioned a moment ago, struck by a drone in international waters off the Maltese coast, leaving the ship ablaze. That strike caused significant damage to the ship, breaching the hull and putting it at risk of sinking. The fire and the danger of foundering required the Maltese Coast Guard to send a rescue ship. And it later emerged that shortly before the drone attack on the Conscience, an Israeli Air Force plane had flown near Malta for several hours at low altitude. Israel has never claimed responsibility for the strike on the Conscience, but nor has it denied any accusations. In this case, the response has been a little different, with Israel calling accusations of its involvement, quote, an outright lie. Now, that bold denial doesn't mean that Israel wasn't behind the strike, even if it didn't direct it using its own equipment. At the time of the attack, the family was anchored 50 miles from the port of Sidi Bou Said, but only around 100 meters offshore. That means a local drone operator could easily have flown such a device over the family vessel, either from the shore or from a ship moored nearby. That would be before dropping the incendiary device. The Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, is known to operate networks of informants, spies, and operatives in foreign states. In June, following a wave of Israeli missile strikes on Iran, Israel released footage of what it said were Mossad-backed local agents assembling and launching missiles inside the country. And a Mossad operation last year in Lebanon that resulted in exploding pages, injuring at least 3,500 people and killing around 42, involved a network of operatives in Hungary. So this kind of attack being conducted by a local working for Israel isn't out of the question. I'm now very happy to say I'm joined from Tunis by our much missed colleague, Kieran Andrieu. Kieran, how are you?
Well, it's great to see a very familiar face, Aaron. Great to see you. And I'm fine. I miss all of the Novara family, but I'm absolutely fine.
How big a shock was last night to you? Because, of course, ultimately, the vessel is fine. Nobody was harmed. But there is also that background context of what happened in Maltese waters not that long ago. Initially, what were sentiments among people on the boat, and how quickly did you collectively realize this wasn't necessarily an existential threat to the mission?
Well, I was in a nearby hotel near the port, and as soon as we found out, actually, it was kind of by chance, just checking phones before going to sleep and seeing. You showed some of Yusuf's, my colleague Yusuf Omar's footage there. He was live streaming, and we chanced upon that footage and quickly jumped up and got a taxi down to the port. Now, I'd be lying, Aaron, if I said that at the time I wasn't a bit discombobulated. I think everybody was. When we got down to the port, people from the family boat, because of course there are many boats in this flotilla, but I immediately saw other people from my boat, Greta being one of them, several others, and we were all just a bit shell-shocked. We didn't know what was going on. We could see it was pitch black out on the sea, but we could see in the distance kind of police sirens on the water, so kind of water-based police vessel. And we were hearing rumors swirling around. We knew that everybody on board was safe because we're in a signal group, and they had communicated with us that nobody was injured, and certainly that there were no fatalities, and that the fire was out. Nonetheless, there was still a lot of, kind of chaotic hearsay going on, and people sort of wandering around, working out how to best make themselves useful. And, that started to settle down. And then locals, so, this area, this part of Tunis by the port is very, very pro-Palestine. I mean, like most of Tunisia is, but it's been a kind of focal point for organising for Palestine and Palestine demonstrations and so on. Locals started to pour into the port front and mix with participants in the flotilla, and that's when it kind of went from being a bit chaotic to almost unmanageably chaotic. This went on for a couple of hours. The people on the boat, like Miguel, who you just heard from, came back on a dinghy and, held a brief press conference, and then that was that.
That's a potted history of what was a very, very incredible story. I mean, we posted all of that onto our Instagram account overnight, and I think it's probably the busiest our Instagram account's ever been, over 24 hours. I think 2 posts between them have like 130,000 likes on Instagram. And I'm really happy to say that you're helping us relay this story to the wider world in a way that legacy media isn't, Kieran. I've got some questions and comments for you, if you don't mind me asking you these, Kieran. None of them are unsavory, don't worry, or too personal.
I trust you.
Yeah, let's be relatively quick, because we've got 4. And maybe you might find some more interesting than others. This is from Mr. Lee Kicker. Kieran, what measures are you taking to keep yourself safe? Lee, kiss.
Thanks, Lee. Well, first of all, there's the kind of the organising committee, which, there are some teething problems in organising such a large logistical civilian operation. And, everybody says, and it's worth repeating, this is a civilian operation because institutions have failed. Nonetheless, despite those teething problems, there have been some things that have been done very thoroughly. And one of them was the initial safety seminars that we did in Barcelona. And I think the key thing that we have had drilled into us and been trained for, Lee, is that this is a non-violent humanitarian mission. We might harbour whatever feelings we harbour toward the IDF, but the sort of scenes that we saw on the Mavi Mara in 2010, with people throwing sandwiches and water and things like that at the IDF, are just they have no place on this mission, because of course the Mavi Mara, which was, just for context, the flotilla in 2010, was intercepted by the IDF. It resulted in 10 deaths. So we've had it kind of inculcated into us, and we've been trained, I think, very thoroughly to that effect, that this is a non-violent humanitarian mission, and that there are certain protocols that we should follow. If we get intercepted, obviously we're going there to deliver they're going there to deliver the aid. But if the boat is intercepted, there are very specific safety protocols that everybody must follow in order to best guarantee de-escalation, if you like.
We've got from Shiny Warm. What does the experience so far say about popular support for Palestine in the UK compared with that in other countries? I suppose that applies to the countries you've been in, so obviously Spain and now Tunisia, but you're also with a big crew of other people from a range of countries. So where do you think support for Palestine in the UK fits relative to other places?
I think that for all of the million faults in the UK, and most of them in this particular area lie with institutions, with the police, with the government. I mean, we could talk about that all day, and indeed we have. But actually, at a civil society level, despite the impending reform government and all of that horrible mise en scène, I actually think that the British public has been more actively and more in a more organized way pro-Palestine than most European counterparts. And actually, that was the view in Barcelona. So a lot of the people joining the flotilla in Barcelona were saying to me regularly how envious they were of the organizing structures for Palestine demonstrations and civil disobedience and so on in the UK. Now, we could speculate as to the kind of the lineage of that. Was it the big anti-war movements mobilized in the early 2000s? Is it something to do with demographics? It's probably a bit of both, right? But basically, I think to answer the question more directly, I think actually the UK figures very well at a civil society level. Of course, in the Arab world, you'll find more widespread consciousness about Palestine and more kind of anti-Israel sentiment across the board. But if you're comparing Britain to other European countries, you just have to look at the numbers that the UK's demonstrations get out to see that there's a big skew between where the government is and where the public is.
We have two more for you, Kieran. Oh no, we've got one more. This is from Dalian Haynes. Not a question, but can you tell Kieran we're all super proud of him and the crew, and we're all wishing for his safe return. We certainly think that here at Novara Media, Kieran. But you are doing something pretty incredible. I mean, if you guys do get to dock and to get that aid into Gaza, it's going to be a really historic moment. So everything crossed for you to get there safely and, of course, return safely. Any final words for our audience tonight?
Well, just thank you for highlighting that. It's not a question, but, and Aaron, thank you for echoing it on behalf of Novara. I think the important thing is that we're all determined. I'm covering it as a journalist, but look, you all know that I'm Palestinian. You all know how I feel about this. And so I think I can say we in this context. We are all determined to open a humanitarian corridor into Gaza. And I will just say this, all of the kind things that people have said, not just to me, but to other people on the family ship and all the other ships, you can't begin to imagine how much it buoys people, no pun intended, how much it helps people through what is otherwise, a fairly exceptional set of circumstances for people who lead generally quite privileged lives. So thank you very much.
Kieran, we'll leave it there. Godspeed. Speak soon.
Thank you. Cheers, Aaron.
Stay safe. That was Kieran Andrieu, one of our own here at Novara Media, talking to me live from Tunis. Kojo, how are we? Good to have you on.
How you doing, Aaron? Good to be here.
I'm all good. Well, look, what do you make of both of these stories? Because of course there's a thread running through both of them, isn't there? That Israel is something of a pariah on the international stage, and the fight back when it comes to Europeans, in any case, is being led fundamentally by civil society rather than nation states.
Absolutely. I think that the common thread between both the first story in Doha and the story with the flotilla is that this is the long-term consequences of Israel really being allowed to operate with impunity and being able to ignore international law, ignore international norms, and that's only going to have the consequence of emboldening the state to take in actions that I think even, a decade or so ago would have been seen as unprecedented. When we talk about this attack on the flotilla, this is something that the Israeli government have been openly warning us that they would undertake. Israeli Katz, the Israel defense minister, has openly stated that Israel's military will take whatever measures they feel are necessary to stop the flotilla opening up a humanitarian corridor into Palestine. And so when we see actions like this has been signposted. And I think it's part of the failure of the states of Israel's allies, including European and North American states, to actually hold that government to account.
You're a legal academic, right? So I want to ask you a question, really, which is obviously Israel is just perennially now transgressing international laws, has done obviously for a very long time. But it feels like the attack on Gaza today, as David Waring said at the top of the show, is qualitatively different. It feels like it's an outright challenge to the international order led by the United States, even though bizarrely the US is going along with it. In your game, so to speak, in the sort of game of legal academia, how much are you having that conversation about Israel kind of being a major variable in basically upturning the international order?
I mean, this is something that I think is really what's making people interested in international law and its ability to actually enact any kind of enforcement in the 21st century. I think that we can see from the ICJ case around the genocide, we can see about even with the flotilla case today, whilst the Tunisian government are talking about there's no attack, the UN Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, is admitting that there was an attack on the flotilla. So the kind of institutions and the tribunes of international law are looking to try and push against Israel's action, but the aggressiveness of the Israeli state is eroding the international rules-based order, as it used to be known, in a way that's much more aggressive than, what George Bush would have called, the axis of evil, 20 years ago. I think that it is fortunate for Israel that they are undertaking these actions at a moment in which there is a kind of widespread withdrawal from this investment in the international rules-based order, from the rise of protectionism to, Trump's avalanche of tariffs. There is a general withdrawing from the idea that these institutions, this architecture of international law that has really encased US global power for the best part of a century, we see that falling apart in the moment, and we see that opening up a space for Israel to take these kind of gangster actions, as you said earlier before.
One more question, because I think this is your wheelhouse. That's what they say, right? This is your this stuff inside out. You've talked about the upending of the international order, and Israel's exploiting this unique moment of Trump being in the White House. They're probably never going to be able to get away with this much stuff ever again. I mean, what's the time frame we're looking at here? I know on one level that sounds like a sort of trivial, stupid question, but it's clearly of importance for activists and politicians and people that care about championing a particular cause, whether that's Gaza or Armenia, Azerbaijan, or whatever. How should we think about this? Does it end with Netanyahu? Does it end with Trump? Or is this just a new normal for international relations?
I mean, I think that this feels like we're entering into a new epoch for what the international arena is going to look like. How it ends, I think, is still an open question. But I think that the inspirational protests that we've seen, as Kieran said, the United Kingdom at a civil society level, in terms of a grassroots level, has been really inspiring as we see people try to push their governments into taking action against the Israeli state and what it's doing in Gaza. We see potentially an opportunity for a new model of international order that might actually be perhaps a little bit more collaborative, a little bit more global in its actual framework than what we had over the 20th century. There is still an outsized role that states like the United Kingdom have in international law. We can look at the, permanent seat on the UN Security Council, and we can still remember that the establishment of the United Nations, the establishment of the international order, whilst in practice may have encased and protected US imperial power, also created great hope for countries in the global south, particularly in that kind of early decolonization period. Look at the writings about international law from the likes of a Michael Banley or a Kwame Nkrumah. So I think that if we could recover this idea of what it means to be in a global community, to be an international community, perhaps we could build something that was even better than was in the 20th century. But before we do that, I do think we have to stop the Israeli state, assassinating aid workers and doctors and journalists with impunity, because on no basis does that maintain the principles of the international rules-based order, no matter how threadbare it was.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, what basically this is an expression of is the breakdown of US hegemony, right? The Suez Crisis in 1953, somebody's going to correct me. Suez Crisis 1953, the French, the British worked with the Israelis secretively to effectively regain control of the Suez Canal. The Americans find out, and within 24 hours, they say to the Brits, if you do this, we will sanction you, right? This is less than 10 years after the end of World War II. That is American hegemony at its height. It tells people what to do thousands of miles away from American shores. That level of hegemony has gone. We're now looking at the disintegration of US empire in West Asia in particular, other parts of the world too. And I'm not suggesting that American empire had upsides, but it was certainly more predictable. I think we live in an increasingly unpredictable world, nowhere more so than that neck of the woods, North Africa and what's been called the Middle East or West Asia. We'll go on to our next story. It's at home. I know you might be thinking, 2 stories on Israel. Why are you talking about Israel so much? Look, I have to say, if people watching this, you're on the right, you care about migration, for instance. Always one of the top 2 issues in this country, migration. I have no idea how somebody can say we want lower migration, we want lower numbers of refugees coming into Europe. I have no idea how you can say that on one hand, and then say, you know what, Israel can have a foreign policy which is ultimately going to displace maybe 100 million people, right? Failed states in Iran and Egypt, and some even say Turkey, some Israeli politicians. Syria. The whole doctrine now for Israel is to have no peer rival in West Asia, and effectively for no country to be able to determine its own political agenda. If we don't like it, we will bomb you. That's just happened in Gaza, right? That is going to lead to the displacement of millions of people. So like I say, I don't see how on the right you can be anti-migration or anti-refugees. It's not my position, but it's a position many people hold. And at the same time give carte blanche to the Israelis to do what they're doing. I can't understand that, frankly. That to me seems like basic causality. That's why we talk about Israel repeatedly on the show, not just because there is a genocide in Gaza, not just because of the war crimes, the displacement, the ethnic cleansing, which by the way didn't start in 2023, but because all of this has massive historic implications for the international order, as Kojo just said, but also for geopolitics in Europe as well. I think, frankly, this war, this permanent war that Israel is engaging in this region, I think it is going to be the defining conflict of the 21st century. If Israel gets everything it wants by behaving in this manner, I think it means the beginning of a very dark period for humanity. That's why we talk about it a lot. And that's why those brave people are on that boat in Tunis right now. That's why, because huge things are at stake. Reform have been leading in national polls for months. And in May's local elections, they gained 677 council seats. That was 41% of all the seats up for grabs. But other than migration, nobody really knows what the party stands for. They talk about lower tax and defending state pensions and elderly benefits because they know the people likely to vote for them are interested in those things. But on schools, industrial policy, energy, hospitals, we have basically no idea. There is one exception, though, now at least, because in the last few days, Reform has put clear baby blue water between themselves and Labour, specifically on trains. Richard Tice, Reform's deputy leader and one of its 4 MPs, has said a Reform government would cancel high-speed routes linking the major cities of the north, labelling such endeavours, quote, a waste of money. And that comes after the party held its conference in Birmingham over the weekend, and it comes ahead of Labour's own get-together in Liverpool later this month. It's then that many are expecting an announcement on what has been called Northern Powerhouse Rail. First touted by then-Chancellor George Osborne in 2014, NPR was designed to work alongside HS2 and connect Manchester and Leeds via Bradford. At that point, remember, HS2 was meant to go further than just Birmingham. There was also talk of high-speed connections going west to Liverpool and east to Hull, not to mention north to Newcastle too. In other words, the UK was looking at a national high-speed rail network, just like France, Spain, and Italy. Fast forward to 2021, and the Tory government under Boris Johnson cut NPR. But now Labour under Rachel Reeves wants to bring a lot of that programme back, though quite how much remains unclear. This is from the Guardian newspaper just last month. Political and industry figures in the north of England have urged Starmer for over a year to revive the Manchester leg of HS2 and to build Northern Powerhouse Rail, an east-west connection linking Liverpool to Hull. NPR is seen by some as critical to rebalancing the UK's economy, as it would connect potentially 5 of Britain's major cities, including Leeds, Bradford and Sheffield, on a route that for decades has been choked by trundling old trains and the overloaded M62. A Department of Transport source said the exact route had not yet been formally agreed. The NPR plan requires part of the HS2 construction between Crewe and Manchester to go ahead, raising hopes that ministers would also commit some form of HS2 running to Birmingham and London. Just to be clear, HS2 was meant to go London to Manchester via Birmingham. It's now stopping at Birmingham. So if you're going to revive NPR, Northern Powerhouse Rail, you're probably going to revive something of HS2 going north of Birmingham too, which is good news, I think. I'm a big train guy. And so are mayors Andy Burnham and Tracy Brabin. They also like trains. They're very keen, unsurprisingly, on the resurrection of NPR as well. And as I've already mentioned, Rachel Reeves reputedly sees the project as essential in rebalancing Britain's economy away from London. Richard Tice, however, couldn't disagree more. He's written the foreword to a new report by the right-wing think tank Policy Exchange, saying this: "We all know the phrase that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results. All of us, it seems, except the government. Even as the historic disaster of HS2 blows through more billions in overspending and more years of delay, even as it sucks money from things the country actually needs, even as taxes on people and business rise, ministers are about to commit to further high-speed rail schemes which could make HS2's problems and price tag look trivial." Not quite right, given the figures at stake. However, let's go on. As this paper forensically explains, this is the Policy Exchange paper, one of the schemes, a new high-speed line between Liverpool and Manchester that I call HS3, it was called that before, Richard, will cost up to £30 billion, but journeys on it between those two great cities will actually take longer than the rail service does now. And if the line is extended across the Pennines to Leeds, another 40 billion might be needed, for a journey time saving of around 10 minutes. Ministers are also preparing a revival of the cancelled northern leg of HS2, a further 25 to 30 billion pound commitment. History shows these numbers will be tens of billions higher. I mean, it doesn't quite work like that, does it? Presumably, you're not going to have Labour politicians saying, you know what, the first project was massively over budget, they really screwed up, let's do the same again. Presumably, you're gonna learn some lessons. You'd hope. Normally, that's what happens, right? Normally in life, you do something and you screw up. You don't do the exact same thing all over again. In business, in commerce, in industry, this is called the experience curve, right? Think about it. When you make something from IKEA, right, a flat pack desk, that desk is going to take you 2 hours. By the end of it, if you have to make it again, it's going to take you 30 minutes. And if you have to make it a third time, 20 minutes and so on. The more you do something, the better you get at it. Which is why, yes, building HS2 was very expensive. The more high-speed rail we build, the more trams we build, guess what? The cheaper they'll get. So you can't say we can't build no more because it's so expensive. We have to build more to bring the price down. Anyway, Tice also wrote this. Outside a bubble of politicians, journalists, and construction industry lobbyists, also exposed by this report, the voters of the North do not want and have never wanted a handful of high-speed rail lines serving a handful of big cities at fares only business people on expenses can afford. Not true. Not true. People like rail. People vote with their feet, by the way. Look at the Elizabeth line in London. Finally, Tice touches on the counter-proposal in the report, namely an Elizabeth line for Greater Manchester. This report suggests a whole series of such improvements, including an Elizabeth line for Manchester, very catchy, which would deliver more for more people in more places, more quickly, more cheaply, than any high-speed rail scheme. We will examine them closely. To anyone tempted to bid for the Liverpool-Manchester high-speed scheme or the revived northern leg of HS2, I give this warning. Do not bother. A reformed government will spend the money instead on things the country needs more. That is the choice. Tens of billions free to spend on conventional rail and roads that help ordinary folk get to work, or another 2 decades of failure and waste. So, regarding the counter-proposal from the report, Tice says, we'll examine them closely. Reform will examine. That's politicians speak for. We ain't going to do any of them. In other words, we know what we're against, but we have no idea what we're for. We'll examine them closely. Basically means I'll get the report, I'll scrunch it up, throw it in the bin. Tice says he wants more conventional rail. And yet HS1 connecting King's Cross to Eurostar is not conventional rail. It's high speed. That's why it's called HS1. It was commissioned by John Major and the Tories in 1993. Presumably that was woke nuts zero nonsense for Mr. Tice. The report's author, this report panning Northern Powerhouse Rail, is none other than Andrew Gilligan, who was a high-profile opponent of HS2. He was also an advisor to not one, but two Conservative prime ministers between 2019 and 2024, which means on matters of policy, he has all the credibility of a guy on Tinder claiming to be 6'4". Because you might read the report and think that the Elizabeth Line proposal is a good idea. It might be. Sounds quite catchy, right? Which is presumably why they said it. Personally, I would do both. HS2, MPR, and Elizabeth Line. Turn Manchester into a London of the North with slightly fewer twats. But the point of these proposals from right-wing think tanks isn't do this instead of this. It's we'll say do this instead of this, but do nothing at all. That's the point. It's about ensuring the state can't build stuff because after all, if it does build stuff and successfully, that's at odds with their value system and worldview. Kojo, you grew up in the Northwest. What do you make of this?
I mean, I was actually just home recently and I took the train from Southport, Merseyside to Manchester. And, you know, respect to all the good people who work on Northern Rail, but that train, you know, could have been more Victorian if it had steam coming out of it and the Fat Controller yelling at it as it rode by. You know, it desperately needs investment in public transportation infrastructure in that area. This is something, as opposed to what Richard Tice mentioned, people in the North want. You know, a YouGov poll showed that 69% of people in the North support this proposal, as well as 62% of people across the country. And you also just wonder, like, how would Richard Tice know what people in the North want? He lives in Dubai. Like, this is where, you know, in terms of improving the day-to-day experience of ordinary people on the ground in the North, improving public transportation infrastructure, I think is crucial. And I think this is just showing through their unwillingness to invest in the North that Reform are offering very little to people outside of, you know, the chance to basically bash immigrants.
Yeah, I've got some comments here saying London of the North with slightly fewer twats, laughed my ass off. And Manchester is already the London of the North. You know, one of the things that ruins London is the financial district. This is something you'll notice, right? When you have a great capital city, which doesn't have a financial district, or a leading tier 1 city in a country, which doesn't have a financial district, it's great, okay? Berlin is great because all the finance people are in Frankfurt, okay? Glasgow is great because all the finance people are in Edinburgh. I think Manchester can be great because all the finance people are in London, right? That's why we should do all the projects, maximum HS2, Northern Powerhouse Rail, and why not Elizabeth Line for London. Somebody's saying it's already the London of the North. How do I say this? You have no idea. You have no idea how, or maybe you do, how bad public transport is in this country outside of London, okay? It's awful. It might as well be different countries. But I do find it interesting that on all of the issues, Reform have come out on this one. It seems very weird. We've got a £5 super chat. I can't compute right wing and think in the same sentence. Policy Exchange are, look, it's a family show. Policy Exchange aren't to be taken seriously on this stuff, put it that way. And yet, they'll go on the BBC and the BBC will say, we've got XYZ from Policy Exchange, the august think tank. And speaking for the opposition, we've got Ash Sarkar from nutty left-wing Novara Media. Policy Exchange is quite nutty, but of course they always miss that bit out. Peter Mandelson is Britain's ambassador to the United States. That's a role he's been in since February this year. Before then, he was a lobbyist, having founded Global Counsel in 2010, which proceeded to represent clients like TikTok, Shell, Shine, Palantir, and Anglo American. And before that, he was, of course, a cabinet minister 3 times during the New Labour years, having to sensationally resign in disgrace twice. Mandelson was, in his own words, the third man in New Labour, the eminence grise behind not just Tony Blair, but Gordon Brown too. And all those years around power meant Mandelson became pally with some very powerful people. He was famously on a super yacht with Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska and financier Nat Rothschild. He was even reportedly friends with Anna Wintour at Vogue magazine. But besides that list of the rich and the famous, Mandelson was on excellent terms with then billionaire financier Jeffrey Epstein. I say then in the past tense because, of course, he's now dead. And he's now known to most of the world, not as a financier, but as the most high-profile paedophile in the 21st century. He even had his own sex island, where others such as Bill Gates and Prince Andrew once visited. Until now, Mandelson has only said he regrets being introduced to Epstein, with the true extent of their friendship not really that clear. And that somewhat changed in 2019 when a report on Epstein by JP Morgan Bank was filed to a New York court. It found Epstein appeared to, quote, maintain a particularly close relationship with Prince Andrew, and you guessed it, Lord Peter Mandelson. And we now know the two were the closest of friends because that's what Mandelson says. He says it in a birthday book for Epstein's 50th birthday that has just come to light. Here's what Mandelson wrote in that book in 2003. What he writes is alongside a series of meaningful photographs for the two men. And the reason why this is all now public is that that birthday book from 22 years ago was turned over recently to the House Oversight Committee in response to a subpoena issued by its chair, James Comer, and a letter from the Democrats, Sylvia Garcia, and other Democrat, Ro Khanna, urging Epstein's estate to produce the materials. Anyway, here's what Mandelson contributed to that book. Once upon a time, an intelligent, sharp-witted man they call mysterious parachuted into my life. You can see there's a picture of a parachute. Maybe that's Epstein. I would spend many hours just waiting for him to turn up, and that's clearly Lord Mandelson, maybe on Pedo Island, we don't know. And often, no sooner were you getting used to having him around, and you would suddenly be alone again. There's somebody in a boat near some islands. Again, maybe that's Pedo Island. Leaving you with some, quote, interesting friends to entertain instead. There's Lord Mandelson there with two other people. One is a cleaning lady. She's had her face obscured. And the other is, we're told, Ghislaine Maxwell, wearing a very bizarre face covering, or it's been obscured for the photo book. Or just some dogs to keep you company. He wasn't always so keen on them. But then he would parachute back in. We're back to that parachute pic. Very occasionally taking you by surprise in some far-off places. Or in one of his glorious homes he likes to share with his friends. Yum, yum. But wherever he is in the world, he remains my best pal. Yum, yum. Yum, yum, alongside an image of Epstein's Pedo Island, an island Mandelson reputedly stayed at for a week with his then partner and now husband back in 2002. Yum, yum. Another signatory in that birthday book was Jean-Luc Brunel. Brunel was a modeling agent who died age 75 in 2022 in apparent suicide. So many suicides, right? While awaiting trial for sexual assault rape in France. Did Mandelson know him as well? Did he know what sort of person this was? No, apparently not. Maybe if you're such a bad judge of character, Pete, you shouldn't be this country's ambassador to the United States. Just a thought. My best pal in the world 1 minute, the world's most infamous sexual predator the next. Here's Labour's health secretary and good friend, protege even, of Mandelson, Wes Streeting, discussing the issue on Sky News Today.
Final question. There's been another release of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein coming from Democrats in Congress, and some of them have included letters that appear to have been sent to Jeffrey Epstein by Peter Mandelson. Is it a problem that he's continued to be linked to Jeffrey Epstein whilst having such an important role?
Well, I think our ambassador has made it very clear that he deeply regrets ever having been introduced to Epstein, and frankly, given what we all now know about the way he conducted himself and the sort of appalling testimony we've heard from Epstein's victims, who would want to be associated with him, frankly.
So it doesn't lead to a change in ambassador or any consideration of that?
No, I don't think we should regard everyone as guilty by association. I think that the important thing is Epstein's victims receive the justice now and the platform now to tell their stories, to receive the hearing and the justice that comes from transparency and being now able to speak out in a way that sadly they weren't able to do while Epstein was alive. And it's really important that victims are believed, that they're given the space to set out their experiences, and that the justice that was not applied to Epstein in life can at least tarnish his name in death.
That is an example of awful broadcast journalism, okay? You have this country's, look, sometimes you have to step back, right? This country's ambassador to the United States was best pals, his own words, with the world's most infamous paedophile. He stayed on what has been labeled Pedo Island for a week alongside other people who've since died, who were accused of sexual assault. He had no idea any of this was going on. He had no idea. And there are multiple articles, by the way, in the press of saying, I stayed at this island, it was hell, blah, blah, blah. He's talking about interesting guests, yum, yum. And then the journalist just says, so he's not going to go? Spit it out, man. Should this kind of person be the ambassador for this country to the United States? He's saying, my best pal, right? It's not like, we sort of get along, but I regret ever meeting him. My best pal, my best friend. Think about it if you're watching or listening. Who's your best friend in the world? You know them pretty well, right? They're bad bits too. My best pal. And then he starts talking about transparency. Yes, let's do transparency. Let's grill Peter Mandelson about what he knew with regards to Pedo Island. He stayed there long enough. And transparency. And this is, by the way, pure politics speak. Right? You let your buddy, your powerful buddy gets off the hook while you talk about we must listen to survivors and transparency. By the way, one of them's dead. Virginia Giuffre, she died. She's gone. Where's the justice for her? Transparency and accountability. They're just words that don't mean anything. The minute a journalist tries to bring any transparency, by the way, to Peter Mandelson, and it's not going to come from legacy media, it's going to come from somebody like Novara Media, Drop Site News, I have no idea, Tribune, whatever. You put a mic in front of the guy's face. You were, in your own words, best pals with the world's most famous paedophile. Did you not know what he was saying? If I did that, vast swathes of legacy media would say, Aaron Bastani, oh my God, bullying Aaron Bastani, anti-Semite Aaron Bastani. Peter Mandelson, of course, Jewish. By the way, he's as Jewish as I am. He's as Jewish as my father's more Jewish. And Aaron Bastani, hectoring bully. The same people will say, yes, he's talking about transparency and accountability. What do you think accountability is? It's getting people to be accountable for their actions. What they've said, what they've done. I mean, I'll ask you guys out there. What does it say about this country that this man is now an ambassador for Britain? You get all these crazy fever dreams about pedophiles, and I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that Peter Mandelson is a pedophile or he's been involved in anything remotely like that. I'm not saying that. He was, however, in close proximity to many pedophiles, it seems. Certainly Epstein. Somebody who was in close proximity to those people is the ambassador to the US. We're not sending our best, folks, are we? We're not sending our best. I think we'll call it a night there. We've had a great show tonight. Busy night. Michael will, of course, be back tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. Like I say, we're back tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.